Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen and enjoy my stories every day. It was a morning like any other, or at least that's how it seemed at first. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting soft stripes across the bedroom as my wife, Emily, rushed around the room, gathering her things. She had another business trip coming up, and as usual, she was in a hurry, packing last minute and making a mess of the room in the process. "Work again?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "Yes, unfortunately," she said with a practiced smile, her face calm, her movements methodical. She tossed some toiletries into her suitcase, barely glancing my way. "I'll probably be back late tomorrow. If not, then maybe the next morning." I nodded, watching her. Emily and I had been married for nearly a decade, and in that time, I'd grown familiar with all the little details of her routines and habits. Her hurried, almost restless nature was one of them, something I'd found endearing at first. But now, it was different. Recently, these trips had been happening more often, with her explanations for the overnights growing vaguer, and her responses to my questions more clipped. As she leaned over the bed to zip up her suitcase, I felt a surge of unease. Something in her delivery of this itinerary felt too prepared, too precise. But I let it slide, just as I had every other time. Maybe I didn't want to admit to myself what my gut had been telling me for weeks, or maybe I just wasn't ready to confront her yet. Either way, I kept my questions to myself and forced a smile, pretending to be the trusting husband she clearly expected me to be. "I'll keep things going here, as usual," I said, the words feeling heavier than they should have. She gave me a quick, almost dismissive kiss on the cheek and left, suitcase trailing behind her. After the door clicked shut, I stood in the silence of our empty house, a swirl of emotions building inside me. This sense of doubt, this gnawing feeling of betrayal, was starting to feel like a constant presence. Every time she left, every time she returned with just enough details to cover her story, I found myself questioning her version of events a little more. I had always trusted Emily, we had built a life together, a life I thought was rooted in mutual respect and honesty. But now I wasn't sure. And that uncertainty was eating away at me. The day dragged on slowly. I went through the motions, working, answering emails, making dinner for one, but my mind stayed stuck on her. On the way she had barely looked at me, the way her smile had seemed just a bit too fixed. By evening, I couldn't ignore the voice in my head telling me to dig a little deeper, to find out if the woman I'd shared so much of my life with was hiding something. After cleaning up from a dinner I barely tasted, I found myself in our bedroom, staring at her half-open closet, her dresser, her vanity. Her perfume still lingered faintly in the air. I wasn't proud of it, but I went through her things, not really sure what I was hoping to find. Part of me expected to come up empty-handed, to reassure myself that this creeping suspicion was all in my head. But when I opened her travel bag, my heart stopped. Tucked between her clothes were two items that didn't belong. First, there was a crumpled hotel receipt from a luxury hotel downtown. I held it in my hand, reading the name of the hotel and the room charge, feeling my stomach twist with realization. She hadn't mentioned staying at a place like this on any of her work trips. And then, worse yet, I found a box of unopened protections, something we hadn't used in years. My hands trembled as I put the items back, trying to ignore the sick feeling in my gut. I had been suspicious, sure, but I hadn't expected to find something this blatant. This was no misunderstanding, no innocent coincidence. The life we'd built, the loyalty and trust I'd taken for granted, were now tainted by doubt and betrayal. She was seeing someone else. There was no denying it now. I sat down on the edge of the bed, trying to breathe, to keep myself from losing control. I had loved her for years, had given her all my trust. She was the one person I thought I could count on completely. And now, she had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I felt a surge of anger rising, followed by a deep, hollow sadness. It took me a while to regain control, to push aside the emotions tearing through me. But when I did, I knew one thing: I wasn't going to confront her yet. I wanted her to feel as betrayed as I felt, to know the pain of being blindsided. This wasn't going to end with a simple argument or a confrontation where she'd inevitably deny everything or make excuses. No, I was going to make her feel the weight of her actions, make her realize the depth of her betrayal. I was going to get my revenge. That night, I hardly slept. My mind raced with ideas, plans forming in fragments and dissolving just as quickly. By morning, I had a rough idea of what I wanted to do, a way to make her face the consequences of what she'd done. I would be calm, I would be patient. And when the time was right, she'd see just how much damage she'd caused. For the next few days, I pretended everything was fine, going through the motions as if I were none the wiser. I told her I was busy with work, stayed late at the office, and kept my distance. And she, oblivious to my discovery, went about her life as usual. Every time she smiled at me or kissed me goodnight, I felt a sick twist of anger. But I kept my mask on, biding my time. Then, on the Friday night before her next business trip, I decided it was time to put my plan into action. She mentioned casually over dinner that she'd be away again, probably for the whole weekend. I nodded, acting as if I accepted her story without question. I even suggested that I might drop by the hotel after my own meeting, under the guise of a surprise romantic gesture. She hesitated, a flicker of something in her expression, but she quickly covered it up, saying she'd love that. I could tell she didn't mean it. Later that night, after she'd left, I headed to the hotel, my heart pounding with anticipation. I checked my watch, thinking about how she must have met him by now, how they were probably sitting at some dimly lit table in the hotel lounge. I walked in slowly, scanning the room. And then I saw them. Emily was sitting across from a man I'd never seen before, a stranger whose presence in her life was like a knife to the chest. They were laughing, leaning in close, their body language unmistakably intimate. I could feel the anger rising in my chest, but I held it back. I wasn't here to make a scene. No, that would come later. Right now, I was just here to confirm it all, to etch this betrayal into my memory. When I felt I had seen enough, I walked up to their table, my heart pounding, my face calm. "Emily," I said, loud enough for her to hear, but quiet enough to keep it from drawing too much attention. Emily's face drained of color as she looked up at me, her expression frozen in shock. The man, Ryan, I presumed, glanced between us, clearly uncertain but sensing the weight of the moment. I let the silence linger, studying her face, watching the guilt that had nowhere to hide. "Funny running into you here," I said, keeping my tone even, as if I were merely surprised. She stammered, her mouth opening and closing, searching for words that wouldn't come. Who is this?" Ryan finally asked, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, but his eyes darted between Emily and me with unease. "Oh, I'm just Emily's husband," I replied, emphasizing the last word, relishing the look of horror that flashed across her face. "I thought I'd surprise her tonight, show her a little of that romance she's always saying she misses." Emily's hand went to her mouth, and for a moment, she looked as if she might cry. Her eyes were wide, pleading silently for mercy, but I had none to give. Ryan's face paled as he registered the situation fully. He looked at her, then back at me, his mouth slightly open. I didn't," he stammered, trying to rise from his seat. But I held up my hand, stopping him. "No need to go on my account, Ryan," I said with a hollow smile. "Please, enjoy your evening. You've clearly worked hard for it." I turned to Emily. "I'll let you two carry on," I continued, feeling each word leave a sharp edge. "No need to explain anything now. I'm sure you'll have all the time in the world to figure out how to say what you need to say later." I left them there, stunned and speechless, and walked out of the bar, feeling an eerie calm settle over me as I stepped into the cool night. My pulse was racing, my mind numb. But I couldn't deny the dark satisfaction creeping in, the sense of taking control of a situation that had spiraled out of my grasp. I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. I had plans yet to unfold. The next morning, I woke up early, brewing a pot of coffee and sorting through the mess of thoughts that had kept me up all night. I had never been someone to lash out, to let anger control my actions. But this betrayal went deeper than anger, it had taken root in my bones, hollowed me out, and I needed to reclaim the life I thought was mine. The first part of my plan was simple. I began collecting everything of hers that had any sentimental value, anything I knew she cherished. Framed photos of us together, her favorite books, souvenirs from vacations. I packed them neatly into boxes, stacking them in the corner of the guest room, where I knew she would see them as soon as she returned. I wanted her to understand just how far she had fallen in my eyes, to see the pieces of our life together ready to be discarded just as she had discarded our marriage. As I went through the motions, a strange calm settled over me, almost like I was watching someone else's life unravel. I thought of all the times I had believed her stories, ignored the warning signs, trusted her without question. I had been a fool. I could feel the weight of those realizations settling in, pressing down on me with each item I packed away. Later that day, I sat down with my laptop and started gathering evidence. I hadn't wanted to snoop initially, but after what I'd seen, I needed to protect myself. It was as if each click, each text message I saved, helped me gain some control over the situation. I scrolled through emails, saved screenshots, and filed everything away, preparing for the storm I knew was coming. I was going to make this as hard on her as possible. When Emily finally returned on Sunday evening, she walked through the door, a forced smile on her face. I was waiting for her in the living room, leaning back on the couch, feeling the tension in the air as she glanced around, spotting the packed boxes. She looked at me, her expression a mix of defiance and desperation, her carefully constructed facade crumbling with every passing second. I let the silence stretch, watching as her bravado slipped away, her shoulders slumping. "So," I said, breaking the silence, "are you planning to tell me the truth? Or should I start?" She looked down, wringing her hands, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't want you to find out like this." "Find out?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Emily, how long were you planning to keep this up? How many work trips do you think it takes before someone catches on?" She swallowed hard, her eyes shining with guilt. It's not what you think." "It's exactly what I think," I snapped, my voice cutting through the room like a blade. "I know everything, Emily. I saw you. I know about Ryan. I know about the hotel, the lies, the whole pathetic show." She slumped onto the edge of the armchair, her head in her hands. "I never wanted to hurt you." "Well, congratulations. You did a fantastic job anyway," I replied, feeling the anger rising again, sharper and colder than before. Silence settled between us, heavy and suffocating. I could see her struggling, her mind racing to find some way to justify herself, to salvage whatever scrap of dignity she had left. But I was past caring. I watched her with a detachment I hadn't known I was capable of, letting her feel the full weight of her betrayal. Finally, she spoke, her voice thick with regret. "I didn't plan it, you know. It just happened." I shook my head, laughing bitterly. "Funny how things just happen, isn't it? A few lies here, a few nights away there, and suddenly you're living a double life. Quite the coincidence." She flinched at my words, her gaze dropping to the floor. I watched her, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. This was the first time in months I felt like I had any real power over her. I leaned forward, lowering my voice to a harsh whisper. "I want you out, Emily. Take your things, and leave. You've made your choice, and I'm done letting you lie to my face every day." Her head jerked up, her eyes wide with shock. "You don't mean that. We can work this out. We just need time to talk, to heal." "To heal?" I interrupted, a wave of anger surging up. You want to heal. You threw away our life together, Emily. There's nothing left to heal. Now, pack your things and get out. Tears filled her eyes as she looked at me, a silent plea that I ignored. I wasn't going to be swayed by her tears, not after what she had done. I stood up, pointing toward the boxes in the corner of the room. There's everything you've got left here. Take it, and go. For a moment, she just stared at me, her expression torn between anger and heartbreak. And then, slowly, she rose, moving toward the boxes. She picked up a few, her movements jerky, her face pale. I watched her go, my hands clenched at my sides, feeling a strange mix of relief and bitterness. She had made her choice, and now she was facing the consequences. After she was gone, the house felt emptier than it ever had before. The silence echoed around me, and I found myself sitting alone in the dim light, my thoughts churning. I didn't know what would come next or how I would rebuild from here. All I knew was that I had finally taken back control. The emptiness of the house hit me harder than I had expected. It was strange how quickly everything we had built, our life together, our routines, our shared dreams, had shattered, leaving behind nothing but silence and shadows. The familiar rooms seemed foreign now, stripped of the warmth they once held. I spent that first night alone pacing through the house, my mind reeling as I tried to process everything. The truth was, even after telling her to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal that had burrowed deep within me. It haunted me, replaying in my mind with relentless precision. I kept seeing her face as she looked at me in shock, as if she hadn't expected me to have the strength to walk away. Maybe she thought I'd let her stay, that I'd be willing to ignore her affair and let her continue her double life. But she was wrong. I was done being the fool. The following morning, I awoke to a sense of resolve that surprised me. I wasn't going to let her betrayal define me. Instead, I'd use it as fuel. It was time to rebuild, not just the physical parts of my life, but the mental and emotional ones too. The hurt was still there, yes, raw and festering, but I wasn't going to let it ruin me. I had already spent too much time suffering in silence, letting her lies eat away at me. Now, it was time for something new. I decided to start with the house. The same walls that had once felt like home now felt suffocating, haunted by memories of her laugh, her voice, her touch. I couldn't stand the thought of living in a place that she had tainted with lies. So, over the next few days, I threw myself into renovating, redecorating, stripping away anything that reminded me of her. I took down the pictures, replaced the furniture, repainted the walls. Every piece of furniture I moved, every wall I painted, felt like a small victory, a step toward reclaiming my life from the ashes she had left behind. As I worked, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. How many signs I had missed, how easily I had trusted her, how much I had taken for granted. I realized that, for years, I had put my faith in someone who hadn't earned it, someone who had used that trust as a shield to mask her own selfish desires. The realization stung, but it was freeing too. I no longer had to worry about keeping up appearances, about trying to make her happy or meeting her expectations. For the first time in a long time, I was free to be myself. About a week after she had left, I was going through some old paperwork when I stumbled across a forgotten envelope. It was tucked away in a drawer in our shared office, hidden among old bills and bank statements. Curious, I opened it, expecting nothing more than an old receipt or an unimportant document. But what I found inside stopped me cold. It was a letter from her affair partner, Ryan. From the date on the letter, it was clear that this had been going on for much longer than I had realized, almost a year. He wrote about their weekends together, about the hotels they'd stayed in, about the plans they had for the future. My chest tightened as I read, anger simmering under the surface. She had lied to me for an entire year, all the while pretending to be the loving wife, the faithful partner. This wasn't just a one-time mistake, this was a full-blown betrayal, carefully planned and hidden from me. The letter wasn't just painful to read, it was fuel. Holding it in my hands, I knew I wasn't finished. She had walked away with a piece of me, a part of my trust and innocence that I'd never get back. I had already taken my revenge by kicking her out, but that was just the beginning. Now, I wanted to make sure she felt the sting of her betrayal as deeply as I had felt it. The next day, I started making calls. I contacted our mutual friends, letting them know what had happened, explaining in calm, measured tones why our marriage had ended. I was careful not to seem vindictive, I wasn't about to air our dirty laundry with spite. But I made sure they knew the truth, that they saw her for who she truly was. There was something cathartic in those conversations, in watching people's expressions shift from surprise to sympathy, in seeing the disgust they felt for her actions. Word traveled fast. Soon, friends and acquaintances who had once held Emily in high regard began to distance themselves. I knew she would feel it, that her social circle would start to crumble around her as the truth of her betrayal spread. She had built her life on lies, and now that foundation was beginning to crack. But I didn't stop there. I had saved every piece of evidence, every email, every text, every shred of proof of her affair. And now, I used it. I forwarded the messages to her parents, knowing they would be devastated, knowing they had always seen our marriage as something stable and strong. Her parents had always respected me, admired my loyalty, my dedication. And now, they knew what she had done to their idea of a happy marriage, to the life we'd built. Her father, a traditional man with strong values, was furious. He called me that same evening, apologizing profusely, expressing his disappointment in his own daughter. It felt satisfying to hear, even if it didn't erase the pain she had caused. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, I began to find peace in the life I was rebuilding. The house was starting to feel like my own again, and the sting of betrayal was beginning to fade. I still thought of her, of course, I couldn't erase years of memories overnight. But each day, I felt a little stronger, a little more in control. I had faced the worst of it, and now, I was finally moving on. Then, one evening, as I was sitting alone in the living room, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Emily. A single line, "Can we talk?" For a moment, I just stared at the screen, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to ignore her, to let her deal with the mess she had created. But another part of me, the part that had once loved her, was curious. What could she possibly have to say now? I replied with a curt, "Fine. Tomorrow." When she arrived the next day, she looked different. Her usual confidence was gone, replaced by a nervousness I had never seen in her before. She looked around the house, taking in the changes I had made, the absence of anything that reminded me of her. I could see the sadness in her eyes as she realized the full extent of what she had lost. She sat down across from me, her hands wringing in her lap. "I made a mistake," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I hurt you. I know there's nothing I can say to make it right. But I need you to know that I never stopped loving you. I was lost." Her words were like a slap in the face, and I felt a surge of anger rise up again. How dare she come here, after everything she had done, and try to explain it away with some vague excuse of being lost. But I held my tongue, letting her talk, letting her spill her regrets and her apologies. When she finished, I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Emily, you didn't just make a mistake. You made a choice. Over and over again, you chose to lie, to betray me, to keep secrets. And now, you expect me to just forgive you? To pretend it never happened?" Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But I reminded myself of everything I had found, of the lies, the betrayal, the disregard she had shown for our life together. "I'm not the man you once knew," I continued, my voice steady. "I won't go back to being someone who trusts you blindly, who gives you everything without question. That man is gone, and he's not coming back." She nodded, the tears spilling over. I know. I don't expect anything from you, not anymore. I needed to say it. To tell you that I'm sorry. Then you've said it, I replied, my tone final. And now you can go. She looked at me for a long moment, searching my face for some sign of forgiveness, some hint of the man she used to know. But there was nothing left to give. I had let her go the moment she betrayed me, and there was no turning back. As she left, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. She had come to me seeking redemption, but I had nothing left to offer her. The person I was before, the man who had loved her without reservation, was gone. And in his place was someone stronger, someone who knew the value of trust, of loyalty, of self-respect. I stood alone in the quiet of my home, feeling a strange sense of peace settle over me. The pain of her betrayal was still there, lingering like a faint scar. But for the first time since it all began, I felt ready to move on, to leave the past behind and step into a future that was mine alone. In the months following our final conversation, I threw myself into my new life with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Emily was gone, but so were the ghosts of our past. The house, once a museum of memories, had been transformed into something entirely my own, a sanctuary that reflected who I was, not who we had been. I felt lighter each day, embracing my independence, even as I accepted the scars Emily's betrayal had left on me. I took up old hobbies I'd neglected, reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years, and even considered dating again. Life was beginning to feel hopeful, like a book ready to open to a blank page. Then, one afternoon, my phone buzzed with a call from an unfamiliar number. I let it go to voicemail, assuming it was nothing important. But when I listened to the message later, a strange, familiar voice drifted through the speaker. "Hello, this is Dr. Avery from the Northside Medical Center. I wanted to inform you that Emily would like to speak with you. She's here and she's been asking for you." My heart skipped a beat. Dr. Avery hadn't said much, but the message felt weighty, cryptic, even ominous. Emily was at the hospital. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to keep moving forward without reopening old wounds. But there was another part of me, a part one couldn't quite ignore, that needed answers. So, I took a deep breath, grabbed my keys, and drove to the hospital. When I arrived, I was directed to a private room at the end of a quiet hall. The doctor met me at the door, her expression serious. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Emily has been through a difficult time. She's stabilized now, but I think she'll want to tell you what's going on herself." I nodded, bracing myself as I entered the room. Emily lay on the hospital bed, her face pale and drawn. She looked up at me, a weak smile crossing her lips. She seemed smaller, almost fragile, a shadow of the woman I had once known. Her eyes held a softness I hadn't seen in years, as if the arrogance and confidence that had driven her to betray me had drained away, leaving only a shell. "Thank you for coming," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. I took a chair next to her bed, unsure what to say. "The doctor said you wanted to talk." She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I know you probably don't want to be here, and I don't blame you. But I needed to see you, there's something I have to tell you." I waited, my emotions a mix of anger, curiosity, and a strange sense of pity. She looked away for a moment, struggling to find the words. "I didn't leave just because of Ryan," she began, her voice shaking slightly. "It was more complicated than that. A lot more." I felt a surge of irritation at the idea of more excuses, but I forced myself to listen. "I was diagnosed 6 months ago," she continued, her voice raw with emotion. "Ovarian cancer. It's advanced, there's not much they can do now. The treatments haven't worked the way they hoped." Her words sank in slowly, hitting me like a punch to the gut. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "Why didn't you tell me?" I managed, my voice barely steady. "Why didn't you let me help you?" She wiped at her eyes, her expression filled with regret. I was scared, I suppose. Scared of losing control, scared of becoming dependent. And I didn't want you to stay with me out of pity. I wanted to live my life, while I still could. Even if it meant making terrible choices. The weight of her words crushed me. She had betrayed me, yes, but now I understood why she had kept so much hidden, why she had pushed me away and chosen a path of self-destruction. The anger I had harbored began to slip away, replaced by a strange, hollow ache. So, Ryan, was that part of it too? I asked, the words tasting bitter as I spoke them. She nodded, looking down. Yes. He was a distraction, a way to feel alive again. It was selfish and wrong, I know that. But I thought I didn't have time for regrets. I didn't want you to have to watch me waste away. I thought pushing you away would make it easier. A silence stretched between us, thick with unsaid words. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a chasm, staring into the darkness of everything we had been, everything we had lost. Her betrayal had wounded me deeply, but knowing the truth behind it changed everything. She had tried to face her mortality alone, had chosen a path of reckless self-indulgence rather than asking for help. It was foolish, maybe even cruel, but now I could see the desperation in her actions. I didn't want this to be your last memory of me, she said, her voice a cracked whisper. But now, here we are. I swallowed hard, struggling to keep my composure. You should have trusted me. I would have been there for you, Emily. You didn't have to face this alone. She nodded, her eyes filling with tears again. I know. I see that now. I'm so sorry, for everything. For lying, for hurting you, for not being strong enough to ask for your help. There was a finality in her voice, a quiet acceptance of the pain she had caused. I sat there, absorbing her words, feeling the anger and betrayal dissolve, leaving only a strange kind of peace. Is there anything I can do for you? I asked, surprised by the softness in my own voice. She reached out, her hand trembling as she took mine. Just, be here. Even if it's only for a little while. And so, I stayed. I sat by her side, holding her hand as we talked about everything and nothing, sharing memories that now seemed fragile and precious. The pain and betrayal faded, replaced by a strange sense of forgiveness. We had hurt each other in ways that could never be undone, but in that moment, all of it felt small, insignificant in the face of what was happening. Over the next few weeks, I visited her as often as I could. The doctors did their best, but we both knew it was only a matter of time. I watched her weaken, saw the light in her eyes dim. But in those final days, I saw something else too, an honesty, a vulnerability she had never let me see before. On her last day, as I sat by her bedside, she looked at me with a faint smile, her voice barely a whisper. Thank you, for giving me this. For letting me be, just me. I squeezed her hand, my own eyes filling with tears. Thank you, Emily. For letting me in, even if it was only at the end. She closed her eyes, her breathing slowing, her hand going still in mine. And in that quiet moment, with the weight of forgiveness settling over me, I realized that life would go on, that I would carry her memory with me, not as a wound, but as a reminder of love, loss, and the complicated beauty of being human. After she was gone, I sat there for a while, letting the finality of it wash over me. And then I left the hospital, stepping out into a world that was both the same and forever changed. I would move on, I knew that now. But I would carry a piece of her with me, a reminder that even in the face of betrayal, there is always room for forgiveness, always a chance to find peace.